Want to thank you all for joining this session. Xander, over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. So super quick background on myself. So I'm Xander Holtman. I'm the founder and CEO at Scope. And what Scope does is we partner with software companies to help get their customers live. We do this with our expert marketplace, which is a marketplace of agencies and individuals that help get those customers live. Then we also provide the software companies that we partner with implementation management systems so they can track and monitor and see all the progress that the customers and the experts are making on getting live with their products. So with that being said, I'll kind of walk you through some examples and some of the frameworks that I use when I'm thinking about how to continue to keep the team engaged and motivated. I like to keep it really simple, and so I'll just kick things off here. So really the way I think about this is at the top layer, we've got actions. And those are the day-to-day things that you can be doing. The second kind of middle layer here are the emotions. So these are the actions that then impact the emotions of the team. And then finally, the principles. And those principles are really the foundation for understanding your culture. So we'll kick off with principles here. So principles are just rules that define your culture. And there's a lot of different things that you can do to either understand what your culture is and really translate those into those principles. And at Scope, our 3 principles are pretty straightforward and very simple. And we look for these traits in individuals that we're hiring. If folks aren't able to uphold some of the principles that we hold very true to ourselves here, firing is also the other option, and I'll get into the actions a bit later. But really the 3 that we use here at Scope are 1, be assertive but open-minded. So those like heated debates, definitely have a strong point of view, but at the same time, maybe that opinion that someone else has is coming from a different set of data that they can really provide a much more clear perspective, and usually right down the middle is what I've learned is really like the best answer. Up second, energy is more important than experience. This is especially true in the hiring process. Even more important in the actual work that individuals are doing. I've worked with tons of folks that are, quote unquote experts, and you compare them with someone that is maybe not as experienced, but has a ton of energy to want to learn, want to really grow, and is just genuinely deeply curious and has a ton of energy around the problem. They'll blow that person out of the water that's got the experience 10 times out of 10. If not in the short term, definitely in the medium and the long term. And then finally here, really important principle is laser focus. Reason being is starting a company, there's a ton of distractions. If you're early enough in your product life cycle, you're going to get pulled in so many different directions from customers. They're going to have feature requests. They're going to have you name it. And really the best way to move fast is actually to stay hyper-focused. So saying no to a lot of things is the 3rd principle that we really use here at Scope. And so here's some of the things that we actually did, the actions that we took to actually like pull out from the company what were the principles and what was the culture. So the first thing you really need to understand is what are the characteristics that the company needs to succeed. This is an open platform that we did this in. We sent out a survey. We had all the employees put their ideas for what characteristics are needed to succeed, aggregated those, and we actually had a few that were overlapping, and the ones that were overlapping and the ones that resonated the most made it past the next level. The second thing here is what characteristics do you want the company to avoid? So this is things, these are things that you come across day to day when someone does something that just kind of irks you the wrong way a little bit, and something that's just it's not going to help you exceed on the mission here. And then finally here is what defines success. And that's really what this boils down to is the North Star metric. Someone wrote this book called The Aha Moment a bit ago, and this is something that Facebook did when they were figuring out what their North Star metric was in the early days. And it was an individual inviting 10 friends within 7 days. And really what this is thinking about your North Star metric is not just revenue, but if you dig a layer deeper in understanding what actually drives revenue, what drives engaged customers, and continuing to really hone in what that North Star metric is, And so I like to say that if your North Star metric is revenue, you don't know your business well enough. And I think by rallying the team around that particular North Star metric that really defines what the company is, how the progress is going, is really critical to then understanding what your principles are, because you're going to be doing this day in, day out. Everything is going to be rowing towards that North Star metric. So very, very important. So those are the principles. Before I jump any further, I know we've got some active Q&A possible here. So before I jump, any quick questions on the defining principles and understanding the culture a little bit? I'll give it 10 seconds here, and if not, I'll just move on to the next spot here. Cool. So up next, emotions. I like to define emotions as the fuel for your principles. These are obviously emotions are the things that people feel, but really when you're thinking about what emotions are, it's what is the glue, what is the fuel that you layer on top of your principles. And so the first thing that we use at Scope here is a pretty big emotion is the feeling of collaboration. We've then got friction and then fun. And really, when we talk about collaboration, what that means for us here is like a sense of team. We're talking about friction. We're talking about something that creates like a feeling of belief between two individuals. And then finally, fun, which drops the walls and increases belonging as well. And really, when you think about emotions and you think about just the startup journey in general, there's going to always be tough times. And your emotions actually help you help pull the team through those really, really tough times. And then also when things are going well, it's good to celebrate the wins and so on and so forth. But for Scope, we really rely on these three emotions as indicators of success for how well the principles are working and how well people are just enjoying themselves. Are they working well together? If they're not, is the friction good friction? Is it bad friction? And there's definitely a huge difference between good and bad friction. Bad friction is, you leave a conversation with I don't want to say a sense of hatred towards another individual, but it's more of you leave the conversation not having a feeling of learning something, but of a deepening of what your beliefs might actually be, as opposed to, as I kind of mentioned before, in the principles that we have at Scope and that we employ here at Scope. And it's really all about the ability to have your point of view, again, be assertive but open-minded, and that's really where friction comes into play. And then finally up, we've got actions. So the actions are ways to create emotions and instill your principles. And so some of the actual things that we do here at Scope to create those senses of emotion and when you can actually underline them. The first thing that we actually do is we do all hands every single Friday for 15 minutes. And what the all hands does is it helps to identify and underline characteristics that individuals have shown with a perfect example. So the way that we break these down we'll do kudos. So we'll have all of the heads of the different departments, so engineering, product, sales. What we'll have them do is effectively tell me, I speak to them the night before and I put together the all hands deck. This usually is the best to come from top down and say, give me some names of individuals that have done something that has, really upheld the principles. So that could be, again, a moment in time where someone was assertive but open-minded. That's, something could be as simple as, so-and-so was new here a couple weeks ago and they've just been, working their butts off to learn how to do something, or they've shown a lot of energy around it. Really taking a time somewhere in the week to underline the things that people have done to really deeply instill your principles, your culture, and really underlying the actions that then are driving forward what you're expecting out of the team. The second thing here actually is something that we've recently started doing, what we call crowdsourced kudos, which is different than the kudos that are kind of put upon the team. This is what we'll do is the night before the all hands on Thursday evenings. I'll send out just a really simple Airtable form, and you put in the person's name and something that they did that you feel exemplifies one of the principles. So if you think about it, it's across the top it says scope. It's got our 3 principles in there, and then underneath there's 2 fields. It's person's name and why they upheld one of those 3 principles. What that does is it actually allows you as a leader of a business to actually understand how people think about each other, and it creates this almost like emotional connection that is unique when people are openly praising other people. And again, it's all about underlying your principles and underlying your culture. And then finally here, firing is greater than hiring. And this is a slightly controversial thing that I've, as a founder of a business, as we go through different life cycles of our company, startups are like a marathon and a relay race combined into one. So some folks are going to be really good for some parts of the race, and other parts of the race, they're just not going to be able to cut it. And so there's a great saying that everybody's probably very, very familiar here with, which is hire slow and fire fast. And I think especially in startups, this is very, very critical. And what we have done is when we are letting people go in that unfortunate situation, we actually use it as a moment in time to understand why they weren't a fit for the role, and we'll have open Q&A about why someone maybe wasn't the right fit, if there's any concerns, anything that we could do better next time, try to catch that in the hiring process, or maybe there was someone that was not upholding one of the principles that we have and hold very deeply in the company culture. And when you're talking about firing, it's using that as a moment in time to reflect on the principles and reflect on why that individual wasn't able to, uphold the culture and uphold the principles that we have. So those are the 3 pillars. So it's at the base, we've got principles, then we've got emotions, and then finally here we've got actions. And then this is something that I, as a founder, almost have decided to create a poster and put it up in my bedroom and see it every night before I go to bed and every morning when I wake up. But I think this really defines the journey of starting a company. And you do all of these little things, and at the point of you're willing to give up, I like to think that when you're at this is pointless stage, you've got another 40 or 50%. And so I would recommend always pushing as hard as you possibly can. We've seen this just over the last couple of weeks. We were really iterating a lot on our sales motion and really trying to optimize it. And we made some pretty critical changes in how we onboard net new customers and how we onboard those software companies that we're partnering with, and really had to make a lot of very drastic changes. And effectively over the last 8 working days or so, we've seen these pay off in spades. And to say the least, I was at the this is pointless stage about a month ago is definitely very true. But again, stick it out. I think that's the number one thing. I forget where I saw this or who this came from, but if anybody knows the person that actually came up with this chart and this thinking and visualizing it this way, please let me know, because I'd love to thank them. So awesome. Any questions here? We've got about 15 minutes left. Awesome. Ian, is there anything else you want me to share with folks here? Any questions you want me to run through?
Yeah, I just have a quick question to get us started off. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is starting with principles and then bring that down to actions. What are some of the common mistakes that people make, either in setting that up front principles or in the translation down the funnel into actions?
Yeah, so a lot of the common mistakes around, I think, setting your principles, actually thinking about the North Star metric, I think that's a really critical piece. Because if you think about what that North Star is really about, what it's about is it's something that rallies the whole company around a single metric that is, black and white. It's a quantitative metric. People can say this is working, this is not working. And so I think by being able to set that North Star metric, but most importantly, being able to get buy-in from everybody and getting those opinions on, what is it that we want to see in the company? What are some things that we don't want to see in the company? I think it's either trying to create those principles in a silo or in a cave and coming out and telling the company, hey, this is what we're doing. But really identifying some of the most popular ways in which the company just naturally starts to operate. So we naturally have some of those principles that just came out just because that's just the personalities that a lot of people have. So it's some of the things are going to be very intuitive to the team, and some of the things are going to be not so intuitive. So friction is actually a really critical and very, very hard thing to get right, which comes down to being assertive but open-minded. That's not a very natural state for a human being to be in. Is when you get into those like kind of high friction moments, downright debates and arguing matches from time to time. It's a very difficult place to kind of put yourself in being open-minded but assertive. So it's not as though there are necessarily mistakes, but it's trying to think about what are those counterintuitive moments that you can take a principle and really underline it, and actually kind of think about training, training folks in. And Uma here asked the question about, can you please share a few more examples of characteristics that employees gave feedback about and how you prioritize them for the company? I think this is the perfect example of that, actually, which is taking these bits of feedback, open feedback from the company, and then trying to weave those into the day-to-day and finding those positive actions that people have done, underlining them in all hands. Dropping something in the Slack channel where you're on a call with someone or you're in a meeting with someone and you could really call it out. So those are some of the ways that you can think about taking in that feedback and then helping to prioritize it. So Uma, that kind of answers your question, and Ian also answers your question a little bit as well. Cool. Hanson, great question. Is our team remote or hybrid? Any challenges between the two? So we're still an early stage startup, and I think there's nothing more important than having really, really close collaboration. So we are definitely hybrid, and in fact, we've been coming back into the office since Jan 1. Obviously, it's up to the individual to make that call if they're comfortable coming in, but we found that everybody wanted to come in. And so we initially had to set up certain days that teams would come in, and as COVID has started to slow down, and folks were starting to get vaccinated, we've had most of the company in about 3 days a week. Again, there's no right or wrong answer for that. If you feel comfortable coming in, come in. If you want to stay at home and jam on stuff all day and keep your head down, always welcome to do that. But the number one thing, remote or hybrid, is like, are you getting your stuff done? And so that's really critical to understanding the remote and hybrid. And I think the question about the challenges, I think the challenges that we might start to see going forward, I think this is true not just for Scope, but I think in companies in general, are the folks that do want to come back in the office, and then the folks that do want to stay remote. It's how do you make sure that the folks that are coming into the office, you're not over prioritizing them over the folks that are remote. I think that's where some of the challenges are going to pop up. And what we've been able to do around that stuff is, again, the all hands is a really good place to do that. So if you notice some of those remote employees that are just really doing a good job, but the rest of the company is not really there to see it, call them out on the all hands, give them the kudos, and really create moments of interaction that are forced in some ways. And I think, as the questions kind of started flowing in here, it takes one person to ask the question, and everybody else gets comfortable flowing in with questions. And I think, underlying and really pointing out individuals that are upholding your principles or did something really great that week is a really good way to create team cohesion, even when folks might be some hybrid, some fully remote. And one of the things I think we're going to have to continue to focus on, not just true for Scope, but I think for all companies in general. Let's see here. Heather, how much time do you spend on training before you decide to let someone go? That's a great question. That's a really good question. I mean, it's not as though someone is hired and they're fired a week later. I like to think of this as really a couple different stages. So it's fix, move, shoot is how I think about this. It's not necessarily training, but it's more of a step-by-step process to give someone multiple opportunities to be the right fit, because sometimes you definitely have that person that is maybe high energy, are really excited about it, but it's just not the right fit for them from a personality perspective, or just from, again, an energy perspective is really critical. But the way to think about the move, right? So it's fix, move, shoot. So I would say the first thing is fix. Fix would be you have a one-on-one conversation, you let them know that either performance isn't there or whatever the case might be. You try to actually just fix the problem. So that's number one. The second thing is move. So let's say you hired someone for sales and they would actually probably be much better on the marketing side of things. Maybe you move them over, you give them the opportunity to actually, maybe shine in a role that is a better fit for them. Have had that happen tons and tons of times. And then finally, shoot is, look, we tried to fix the situation. We tried to move you to a different role, or, work with a different manager if there's some issues going on there. And then finally, after those, two things, if it's just not working, it's just not working. And then we do everything we can to make sure that person's offboarding is really seamless, really clean, and make sure that they leave with, we feel like we're like a pretty good judge of character here at Scope. And every individual that's come through the doors here so far to date, knock on wood, we haven't had any issues yet. But we feel, there's always a mutual level of respect when we are letting folks go. But with training in particular, it just depends on the role. For sales, give it 4 months, 5 months, 6 months max. If they're not hitting their number, that's a really easy one. Engineering is a little bit more kind of soft on when is like the right time to let someone go. But what I've learned for engineering in particular, it's really how the team is either waiting on that individual to, finish putting their, closing out tickets. It could be they take way too long to get tickets closed. It could be just communication isn't right. And so those are some of the things with regards to, engineering that I've seen is really good leading indicators for someone not being a good fit. So as far as training goes, I think training is great, but I think hands-on experience is better than anything. And so, as a manager, managers have a really good kind of intuitive sense for who's doing a really good job on the role and who's not doing such a good job. And there's some qualitative and quantitative ways you can actually back that up. Then Jennifer asked a question about, is North Star metric just a metric of customer acquisition? The answer is kind of. It's the best way to describe that. Our North Star metric here at Scope is number of new project leads. And what we define as a new project lead is a customer getting matched with an expert. And so that actually means a couple things. One is it is sometimes post vendor acquisition. So that's after we've partnered with the software company, and we're tracking how many new customers they're trying to match with an expert. So that is a level of not just customer acquisition, but also engagement. And then also how well the product is working. If we see flat numbers while we're bringing on new vendors, that means we need to increase the marketing, or maybe there's some weird counterintuitive, really kind of bad UX, UI problems we've had in the product that make it really difficult for experts to connect customers, or excuse me, may make it really difficult for vendors to connect customers with experts. And so it is partially around customer acquisition, but mainly it is customer acquisition, but also product. How well are those two things working together, as well as the really, really high top of funnel things. So for us, that's really where we have found our North Star metric, is it kind of covers those three topics. But at the end of the day, the goal is to build a business. And so you can't have a business without customers. So that's where it all kind of boils down to at the end of the day there. Great. Any more questions here, Ian?
One other question that just, seen is, these are great general principles, but I would, especially given your seat as a founder and CEO of a recently early stage company, how might you tailor this more, or how might you differentiate between smaller stage and potentially later stage startups in building that engaged and motivated?
Yeah. So I think the principles are something that, are something that just naturally comes and is something that will kind of create this feedback loop for when you're hiring the next 100 employees. The actions shouldn't change that much. You're still going to hold all hands. I'd recommend that if you have managers of smaller orgs within the larger org, continue to hold all hands, underline those kudos, still do crowdsource kudos. So I think this framework of principles, emotions, and actions work for any size company. And are actually the most difficult time is to do it earlier on, because you're going to be kind of guessing, and there's going to be a lot of iterating on what is getting the team motivated. Are they engaged or not? So it's the earlier days when the first 10 employees are actually helping you put together what the next 1,000 employees are how they're going to operate, how they're going to work together. And I think principles are something that should evolve as you learn more about the company and as the company evolves, and you include more people on the team because they're going to bring their own perspective. So using one of the principles of being open, being assertive but open-minded, that is part of the iteration process as well. So I think if you're a later stage company and you're trying to understand your principles, the actions still remain the same. Take a survey. What characteristics does the company want? Or that's number one. Number two, what characteristics don't you want? What characteristics do you believe will help the company succeed? And then that North Star metric, if you're a later stage company, will probably evolve. Where you're on earnings calls. If you're a public company, Facebook no longer says, "Oh, we've added, we've had 1,000 new users sign up, and they've each added 10 new friends in the last 7 days." The metric there has changed and evolved over time. But it's still, I guarantee you, if you look at it, comes down to the same idea of how do you make sure that the audience is engaged. And as you come out with new features and new products, you're going to have to continue to craft that North Star, but it should be something that is allowing you to include all parts of your business. So sales, product, engineering, that's all really connected in whatever that North Star metric is.